Hello, dear friends of art. I am glad you are with us again. A warm welcome. For the next 10 days, I have thought of something special for you. We will shed light on darkness and explain art terms in so-called art nuggets for you. I have named this small series, What Does It Actually Mean? At my side is the museum director, Dr. Rainer Vollkommer, who is very knowledgeable about all the terms related to art. Today, we will start with the term museology.
How does the art scene tick? Everything we've always wanted to know about art. A podcast by and with Petra Lossen.
Hello, Dr. Rainer Vollkommer.
Yes, hello, Petra Lossen.
I am glad that you are here. In our first recording, our keywords related to art. Our word today is museology.
Yes, museology is an interesting word, and like almost everything we will also see next time, it comes from Greek or Latin, in this case from museo and muse, from the muse, and simultaneously logos, the teaching, the word.
Is that actually muse from the muse? We know.
Yes.
Actually, I didn't know that.
Yes, because the muses are, so to speak, the bearers of culture and encompass everything related to culture. And that's why the muses are very important, right?
Okay, yes.
And of course, logos, the word, the teaching, the beginning is very important. That's also how the Bible begins. The New Testament, in the beginning was the word. So in the beginning was logos, and logos actually encompasses everything. But for us now, more directly related to museology, the study of the museum.
I can't really do much with it yet. Museology, so it's the study
From
of...
the museum, so everything that the museum includes, and the museum, so to speak, has many subdivisions. So it already starts with the museums. There are different types of museums. This ranges from scientific museums to art museums to historical museums to analogical museums or museums that deal with certain individuals. These can be writers, they can be musicians, they can be significant people who have acquired their own museum. And that is already the diversity of the fields. And then what many have relatively in common are certain mechanisms that occur everywhere. One is that it is often attempted to have a permanent exhibition in a museum, and enriching, and also as a very important factor, additionally special exhibitions. And there are certain premises for these again which should be retained. For example, nowadays there is a lot of talk about storytelling, so that we have objects of any kind or artworks not just stand there on their own, but to tell stories around them, to that empathetically bring the visitors to these objects and possibly give them a bit more than just a view of these objects as a hint, depending on the museum's category. This still much deeper or less deep. Let's move on to the category of art museums. There, it's the case that especially often when you go into such a museum, relatively little storytelling is done compared to a historical museum or an analogous one, where a lot is told about an object and what it might have been, what it means. In art museums, this is relatively little, but I am convinced that this is becoming more and more important, because we have so many different types of artworks spanning the centuries with various eras, with different expressive powers, that it would actually be very important to tell the visitor more about it. And yes, what comes to my mind spontaneously, for example, still life. When we think of still life, we think, yes, that's a beautiful flower pot with a few flowers inside, depending with other objects around, grapes or grapes or something to eat, then there is usually a very nice glass included. In the glass, something can reflect if you know it, and that then expresses much more than just simply the depiction of a set table with liquids, but each of these flowers also have meanings, and you can delve much deeper, and that would be the storytelling, so that you could actually create aha moments for the layperson with many of these artworks. What in my opinion is still not being done enough, and is therefore being discussed more intensively in art museums compared to other museums where this is already inherently included. But as I said, a huge advantage for these museums is that they can achieve a lot more there.
What does museology have to do with collection and acquisition?
Yes, these are. So now the various departments or sections come into play. There is also a department that takes care of acquisitions. This is not the case with all museums.
Mm-hmm.
In the ideal case, it would be like that for everyone, because that can happen no matter whether here, when it comes to the Contemporary Art Museum, where contemporary art collections are, it is clear that it must continuously expand, because otherwise it would stagnate and suddenly no longer be a contemporary museum, but eventually just a museum of modern art.
Challenge too, right?
Is a big challenge, and there are many premises that must be considered, and that is then developed as a section where one must always keep in mind that some parts are for the common good for museums, others are specialized things, and that is also connected to the museum itself. So, for example, if it is a museum that focuses on a personality, let's assume, for example, the Winckelmann, he was someone who lived in the 18th century and was the first to attempt to organize art and the world of art scientifically in the spirit of the Enlightenment, and to represent the history of the development of art in antiquity. Now it could be that besides his works that we know, he wrote very many books, quite significant ones that actually involve classicism and the Enlightenment. But it happens occasionally that, for example, a letter is discovered, and it would naturally be interesting for the Winckelmann's museum, if it had the money to acquire this letter, which was previously unknown, or any objects related to Winckelmann or his time.
Yes.
And it's the same with all other museums. So there would always be very exciting things that would enrich this museum. That's why actually quite an important factor but depending on the situation and how much money is available, it can be realized more or less. But the mechanism itself must also be considered. Where does this come from? Does it have anything? Is it certainly not related to looted art?
Yes.
Is the provenance assured? That's very important. Or to what extent are these works original or but forgeries and stuff? And how significant are they in relation to what the museum already has?
Yes, exactly. Another part is conservation and restoration.
Yes. So let's assume a work is bought or found and comes to the museum. Then it is very important to conserve it initially, which means to preserve it. And if possible, depending on whether it's observed that certain things are broken or potentially endangering the object, they are to be restored.
Exactly.
And that is, of course, another very important factor. And then there are also specialists, the restorers who, for example, take on this task, ideally in dialogue with scientists, to get as close as possible to the object and simultaneously to conserve this object in its various facets through this approach. Exactly, exhibition design would be another very important keyword. And what trends are there in that field? And recently there have been many. It starts with the discussion, for example, what kind of texts we use when we use texts. And in recent years, it has been observed that the so-called simple German would actually be better for communication for everyone, because otherwise the texts can be very intellectual, very scientific, depending on the case, and therefore are not accessible to everyone. Now, the discussion is about how simple German is. And what is simple German?
Yes, exactly.
And then it continues, and that's also a completely new trend, which words we should not use, because they could lead to prejudices or to ideas that are negative. Yes, exactly. So that's also a broad field that has just been opened up, and where some are very critical and, so to speak, swing the pendulum in one direction, and others traditionally say that's not the case at all. And probably over the years, a common ground will need to be found in these discussions as far as possible, of course.
We talk about the words, the choice of words. It almost has to do with the next category of education and communication in the museum, right?
Yes, of course. It has become increasingly important over the last few decades to accompany the whole process. Initially, the focus was on developing educational programs for children and adolescents, so that school classes or groups could come and one could engage them in a playful way, or also introduces meticulously into the subject they are looking at. This can be the museum itself, but it can also be pieces from the museum. However, it can also be an exhibition that is being accompanied, and to which one tries to create enrichment by attempting to use education and mediation to convey these objects. To present as an educational institution and for mediation. And nowadays it is, of course, not just directly from the museum to the public, but often it is also said it should be participatory, meaning others can participate. And through this participation, depending on the case, you might also see interesting aspects that perhaps too intellectualized scientists do not see, but are actually important and can be highlighted in this way.
Oh, yes.
Then, of course, with the exhibition, very important, how do you display? It goes really into details. What kind of font should be used? How large should the font be? Because depending on age, one font or another might not be readable when you're older, or hardly readable. So there are many points to consider.
Yes, exactly. That is a broad topic, isn't it? Yes. And then we also have public relations and marketing. Can I imagine that marketing, yes, public relations, is actually handled similarly to in a company?
Yes, actually, the only major difference, and it is very important, is that one tries to bring in a certain objectivity and a sobriety, and not, so to speak, present things too positively when it is not really the case.
Okay.
And that is a very important factor. Yes, it is very important to provide as much information as possible, but that the information provided is really substantiated. A certain subjectivism is always present, but one should ensure that it is as little subjective as possible, because, in my opinion, it is one of a museum's greatest assets and credibility. And just a few weeks ago, the German Museum Association conducted a study in the German-speaking area where it was determined that this is indeed a very important factor, and compared to other disciplines that are no longer considered credible, politics, media, industries, companies. And that is also the difference regarding the question. A company, of course, tries to get the best out to sell its product.
Yes, that's the difference.
That is the big difference, yes. Mm-hmm.
Then we have reached both ethics and management at the same time. Exactly.
Yes, that naturally includes everything, because managing the assembly of it all is necessary, and must therefore also summarize various aspects and at the same time ensure it is ethically correct. This starts with, as we have already said, the terminology, that we use terms that are truly not prejudiced or negative towards a group. And at the same time, one must also be careful that the objects being handled, so to speak, are in order in terms of provenance and are in order. So these aspects come together again, and it is very important to combine everything.
Yes.
And that is usually the task of the director, or depending on the department, if it's a large museum where entire departments are subdivided, so to speak, to the department head, who is then also supposed to bring this together.
Many thanks, Rainer, for the explanation of the term museology.
How does the art scene tick? Everything we've always wanted to know about art. A podcast by and with Petra Lossen.